are live. Welcome back. This is episode number 28 of Kalibrated with Scott. I'm Scott, of course. I'm joined by Brian Berletic from the New Atlas YouTube page. Brian, how are you doing today?
I'm doing very well. Thank you for having me back. It's actually, we were just talking about this. It's been quite a while since I've been on. And so much has happened since then. So looking forward to the conversation.
Yeah, we have plenty to talk about. We spent probably 20 minutes just now going over all of the topics that we have because we haven't done a podcast since I think early March. I haven't had any guests on. I've been very busy lately, so I'm glad that Brian, you're my first guest back. And let's just hop right into it. There is a number of news things that I would like to talk about, a number of events that have happened. And I think everybody wants to start with the S300s. Just recently, we saw a entire battery of S300 launchers get taken out, along with a Buk missile system and a Gepard, both of which were reportedly defending this S300 missile battery. And the most important information, I think, from the whole event was not that it was destroyed, but rather that it was within 30 kilometers, which is Lancet range, of the front line. And these are long-range air defense systems that are not necessarily needed that close to the front unless, in my prediction, they are getting ready for an offensive. So this is air defense coverage for staging and protection from glide bombs, which has become a major issue. What do you think about it? I'd love to hear your opinion.
Yeah, well, those are all really good points, and it's a good example what we saw unfold. The S300 providing longer range air defense, and then the Buk, and then the Gepard or shorter range. It's interesting because we keep hearing about how successful we know the Buk is pretty good, but we kept hearing about how effective the Gepard was, especially against drones, and it didn't appear to make any difference at all. So if this is actually confirmed, this happened, and that was at least two S300 launchers I saw get hit and destroyed, along with the shorter range air defense systems. That's significant because we know Ukraine doesn't have that many to begin with. You mentioned the glide bombs. These are bombs that something like the Buk or Asa or Tor or Strela, none of them can hit the aircraft delivering these glide bombs. Only the S300 would be able to. So if this actually happened and the S300s were that close to the front line, it is precisely because they're trying to protect some force close to the front. And that would indicate that it is probably in preparation for the offensive. And you would want air defense, including the S-300, somewhere near one of your main points where one of the main axes that you're going to use in the offensive. You would want that there, especially because Russian military aviation has been more active recently. So Ukraine does not have these systems to spare. And when we saw the footage, one exploded spectacularly, and then another one kind of didn't. It's just kind of, well, I don't think it exploded at all. We saw the explosion of the drone, but the system itself seems like it was relatively intact afterwards. I mean, at least from that distance. And just as you suggested before the show got started, it seems like maybe there wasn't a missile in there. And this is something that even the Western media has been talking about. All air defense systems of every type. Western journalists are seeing them in Ukraine with like one or two missiles when they should be full of missiles. They only have maybe one or two missiles. And just as you pointed out before the show, the leaks, they were talking about how Ukraine would be out of these missiles by this point. And so it's very compelling evidence, and it really doesn't bode well for Ukraine that this is the situation that they're in. And people saying that this offensive is the last throw of the dice. I mean, where are they getting more air defense for the next offensive after this one? It's a good question.
Yeah. And then uh, you know, jumping off of that question, does this indicate to you that the Kherson Zaporozhye line is where the offensive will most likely occur? Because that seems like a very heavy investment for me to put those systems that close to the front if that isn't where you're going to go. Because, like you said, they do not have four launchers, which, I only saw three actually get hit and I only saw one explode. So, in all fairness, they could have been decoys or empty. Um, but one definitely went up, and I don't believe you would defend, decoys with Gepards and Books. So, do you believe that this is a strong indication that this is where the offensive will come from now for Ukraine?
I mean, it's going to be I mean, we've all heard of almost nothing else of Ukraine talking about attacking along this axis. I believe that it'll be along this axis almost for sure, and then there may be other possible axes, just like fall last year. They attacked in Kharkov and they also attacked in Kherson. And so I think there's a possibility that there will be more than one. But again, they're going to have to concentrate they don't have that much left. They need to concentrate what they have left. They can't afford to do that along too many points along the line of contact. So yes, I think for sure they're going to go south. This is essentially a promise that they've made to the public and to their Western sponsors that they're going to cut that land bridge between Crimea and the rest of Russia. So it's almost certainly going to happen there, at least.
Yeah, and speaking about going south, this is another great segue. Just south of the Ukrainian border in Crimea, the AFU launched a massive drone attack from Odessa, the port of Odessa, towards Sevastopol. It involved 30 drones, large drones that were almost all of them were shot down, but a few or one reached a oil depot, a oil storage facility in Sevastopol, and it got hit and it went up, and it was pretty spectacular PR, I think. The actual, I would like to know your opinion on the actual damage that it caused and what it could mean for the Russian military.
Well, I think we're still waiting to hear about the overall damage and what impact it's going to have, if any. The thing is, Ukraine has been carrying out attacks, not exactly like this with these drones in particular, but they have been carrying out sabotage and strikes deep into Russian territory. The thing is, they're not doing it often enough, and the scale of the operations aren't big enough. That this is an incident where they're using upward to 30 drones, and that's actually how you would have to carry out each and every attack. Do they have the resources to do this? And I don't think that they do. They have not demonstrated an ability to do this. However, with the offensive coming, I think whatever resources they had left, they have invested heavily in this type of capability. This is not something that they can sustain. And this goes back to what I've been saying for weeks now about the artillery. They may be getting additional artillery, additional drones, stockpiling a huge amount of these munitions and systems, but this is something they can only do one time. They're not going to be able to sustain this. So this may be a preview or a prelude to something that might happen a little more often than we have been seeing, but it's not something that they're going to be able to sustain over the long term. It's strictly within the context of this last roll of the dice offensive.
Yeah, I fully agree. Considering this is just something that came to my mind, considering the recent statements by the Biden administration about proprietary technology in Ernagodar and how they instructed or commanded of the Russians to not inspect it and take it and copy it. Do you think that via Western pressure, Ernagodar is going to be a major point of contention in this upcoming offensive may possibly, amphibious landings, or just try to connect it via land. I'm curious because I honestly see that as the primary goal. I think that if Ukraine can secure a bridgehead around Unigodar, the offensive will be somewhat successful in the eyes of Ukraine.
It's hard to tell. We've been hearing a lot about Ukrainian forces, small groups of saboteurs, reconnaissance crossing the Dnieper River around Kherson and actually along the Dnieper River. But these are small groups of troops, and how are they going to do a full-scale crossing of the river? And even if they do manage to do that, how are they going to sustain it? And that's in addition to everything else they are planning to do or seek to do. How are they going to sustain all of this? It's hard to predict. It might be one of several axes that they decide to attack along, and who knows? There's the possibility. Again, Russia has to protect the entire line of contact. All Ukraine has to do is concentrate whatever they have left at a couple of areas, and there is the possibility that they could locally overwhelm Russia, even though, again, at the end of the day, this is a war of attrition. It is not a war of territorial conquest. So they may succeed, but in the long term, it's really not going to matter. They're going to be right back to where they started after their last offensive, missing an army and waiting for NATO to deliver another one.
Speaking about missing an army or losing an army, that's another perfect segue to Bakhmut, where unfortunately for everyone involved, that horrific battle is still raging in the city. I figured, I think I sent you a message in like February, and I said, it was when Yehidne started to fall and they were on the flanks and they started to get fire control over the 0506. They were hitting it with artillery. The convoys were getting smacked. And I think I said something to you like, you want to come on next Saturday for the podcast when Bakhmut should be wrapping up? Because I legitimately thought that I was thinking there's no way they're going to keep forcing men into this salient to hold this town, that the Ukrainians are fighting a defensive war. They're not going to waste an army holding an indefensible position and losing men and material in the logistics routes alone, let alone in the city. So Ukraine controls about 5% of the city now, and they're still forcing reserves in. I watched a convoy today get hit. I would really like your breakdown on that, because it's been a bewilderment to me. I've been flabbergasted.
Well, I don't really recall what I said back to you in response, but what I have been saying,
I specifically remember, and I'm glad you said it. You said I wouldn't be so sure about that because I was definitely overconfident.
Yeah, because I have been saying all along that Russia's objective is not to take Bakhmut. It's to suck in as much of Ukraine's military in terms of manpower and equipment and destroy it. That is their goal. Of course, if you're taking well-defended positions away from Ukraine and forcing them to fight from areas that are not as easy to defend, that's even more optimal for Russia. But the main objective is to conserve their manpower and equipment while exacting a heavy toll on Ukraine. That is what they've been doing in Bakhmut for months now. And it is taking a toll. We've seen even the Western media begin to admit the huge losses. They always explain that in the context that, oh yes, but Russia is losing even more, even though that doesn't make any sense, because they'll admit in the same article that Russia outguns them and is outfighting them. So it goes back to Ukraine's problem that they've had all along. They're fighting a war they shouldn't be fighting, and they're obsessed with politics and optics. They said they're not going to give up Bakhmut, so there's no possible way for them to give up Bakhmut except to fight until the very absolute last minute. And that means throwing in huge numbers of troops and equipment and losing all of those lives. And again, before the show started, we were talking about how some of these, I mean, a lot of them are territorial defense. These are basically people that just snatch up off the street and throw into the combat, into the fighting. But there's also a lot of special forces and more experienced units being sent. And I've also seen a lot of, I would say, some of the best equipment Ukraine has also fighting in and around Bakhmut. The M109 self-propelled howitzer, for example. Why would they be sending that to Bakhmut and not keeping it to the side for their offensive? Because of this obsession, the optics, the political imperative that they have. And we have, in May, we have Russian Victory Day coming up. And this is how Ukraine thinks. They are saying, we're not going to give Russia any sort of victory, even if it comes at the cost of military resources and hurting themselves in the long term. This is what they're willing to do in the short term for political points, cheap, I would say cheap political points that come at a very high price.
Do you think that the way that this ends, the way that Bakhmut ends up finishing with them fighting to the last, is going to be some sort of rout? Do you think we're going to see Ukrainians walking back through those muddy fields getting hit by artillery shells? Is that a realistic possibility right now? Because the amount of the city they control, to me, makes it look like if they retreat now, the Russians will just follow them out of the city because there's not a lot protecting them. And I'm failing to see how that is going to present as good PR for the, Ukrainian government.
These sort of things are hard to predict or to discuss unless we know the troop dispositions of both Russia and Ukraine. What I will say is that there is a possibility that one of the axes that Ukraine launches its offensive along could be an attempt to retake Bakhmut. And this is something that I would hope Russia would be smart enough to accept the possibility of, and to have a plan, that is not wrapped up and tied to some sort of political goal, that it's strictly military, and that if they feel they're going to lose large numbers of men or end up encircled and cut off, that they would withdraw. And as a matter of fact, we keep hearing about these extensive Russian defenses, both in the south and in the east. And in the east, it's around Popasnaya, which is just east of Bakhmut. So it's very possible that they understand this is a possibility, and they will withdraw, retreat to those defense lines. And while it will be a huge political victory for Ukraine, they're going to lose a huge amount of their army. First of all, taking Bakhmut and then working their way toward those defense lines. And again, this is exactly what happened last year in the fall in Kharkov and Kherson. They were losing brigades worth of men and machines, to the point where since the end of that offensive, again, they've been waiting for NATO to deliver a whole army's worth of trained manpower and equipment.
Yeah. To me, it just seems, I mean, it is what it is. It's political leadership running military affairs, and it usually doesn't end well. And I think we're on the cusp of seeing that not ending as well as it should. I wanted to move into the geopolitical sphere a little bit now. We recently had a call between Zelensky and Xi, and they talked about potential negotiations, ceasefires, what it would take to get there. I think that this is all a act. I think this is all a show from pretty much every side. That's just how I think about it. I think that China would benefit, obviously, from a possible peace in Ukraine, potentially, but that could also lead to the US's focus switching over to China more heavily. So I don't see Russia going along with it. I don't see China really being very serious about it. The US is definitely not going to let China be the diplomatic leader of the world. And Zelensky is requesting 1991 borders, which just seems, I mean, it's just unrealistic. So I'd like to get your opinion on what you think of the recent conversation between Zelensky and Xi.
Well, I think Alexander Machuras of the Duran, I think he did the best job breaking this down. And he was referring to the Chinese readout of the conversation. And essentially, and this is kind of the way I saw it too, China is deeply interested in upholding international law, uh, keeping the door of diplomacy open at all times. And so has Russia, but they're not unrealistic. They understand that Russia's fate is tied directly to China's, that what the US is doing to Russia right now is the same thing the US is doing to China. And that after, just as you said, just whenever the situation in Ukraine is resolved one way or the other, the US is going to pivot entirely toward China. China understands this. There's no doubt about that. Essentially, what they were doing was offering Ukraine an option, even if it's an unrealistic option for Ukraine to take. You're being fed into a proxy war by the US. The US is benefiting at your expense, and at any time at all that you want to stop this, we will be here and we will help you resolve it. And I don't think it's going to be anything even remotely close to whatever borders Zelensky thinks it still represents Ukraine. I think it's going to involve a huge amount of compromise, but it's going to be compromise made after Ukraine inevitably has to break from the US. I mean, has to break from the US if they want to resolve this somewhere else other than on the battlefield. And so I think that's what the whole point was. China has to at least keep the door open to diplomacy, even if the chance is so small, if not non-existent, that Ukraine is going to walk through that door.
So if Ukraine ends up walking through that door, what is the United States' reaction? Because this is a hefty investment. I mean, to have the person who's basically your puppet walk away and go to, you know, the Chinese side, and you're gonna lose out on whatever potential gain there is from this situation, whether it's weakening Russia. You know, I still believe that they're hoping for regime change through some, you know, domestic issues, but the economy stayed strong, so that didn't end up happening. What do you think the West's reaction would be? I'm not. I guess I mean more the United States and not Western Europe.
You know, again, this is very hard to tell. Look at Saudi Arabia. I mean, think about, from America's point of view, what an investment that was to have Saudi Arabia and Iran starting to make peace, and the whole proxy war in Syria unraveling. I mean, it's a very similar situation when you think about it. And what is the US going to do regarding Saudi Arabia? And this is something we don't know. We know they're going to try to do something, but what? I don't know. A lot of people instinctively think it will be regime change, and I don't think that that's a bad guess. And I think that could be a very similar option the US would exercise in regards to Ukraine. Overthrow the government of Ukraine, get a hardliner in there that will fight to the last Ukrainian, as promised.
I have a little prediction for that. I can't remember his name, but he's the head of the military intelligence, and he to me he looks like the person that they're positioning to take over if Zelensky, you know, ends up not panning out the way that they want him to. He is a hardliner and quote unquote Western educated, so he's definitely their man. Again, shifting now. I actually don't know a lot about this, and I would like you to maybe interject or not if the topic isn't relevant. But your home country, there's some shady business going on with the elections. No, is that's happening right now?
Oh, you mean here in Thailand, right?
Yes.
Where I'm based. Yeah, I'm
Oh,
based in
sorry, not
Thailand.
America.
Yeah.
Where your home is now.
Yes, yes. So yeah, in Thailand, and as a matter of fact, this is related. It is relevant because it's all part of the same agenda. The United States wants to eliminate any peer or near peer competitor, primarily Russia and China. And the way that they've been doing this is not only directly undermining both Russia and China, but also working along their periphery. All of these nations, and for Russia, Eastern Europe, Central Asia, the Caucasus region, and for China, it's everywhere, including Southeast Asia, where Thailand is. So the current government, which is closely linked to the military, they have a very close relationship with China, and it is a growing relationship. The Thai Navy just took delivery of a new ship from China, built specifically for Thailand. The Navy is also getting their first modern submarines from China. They've been replacing all of their old, aging U.S. military equipment with Chinese equipment, and also some from other countries, including Russia, helicopters, for example, from Russia. So this is something that's been going on. It has been expanding over the last several years. The U.S. has attempted to install client regimes at different points in recent history. From 2001 to 2006, there was Thaksin Shinawatra, a billionaire, Carlyle advisor, and while he was prime minister, he began selling the country out to the U.S. at Thailand's expense. His sister was in power from 2011 to 2014, and now we've got this election coming up. The U.S. is backing not only Thaksin Shinawatra's party, who he is still running despite being a convicted criminal and fugitive hiding abroad. There's also Thanathorn, Chuangrung Ruangkit, and he's another billionaire that the U.S. openly backs. When he was charged with sedition and had to answer the charges at the police station, representatives from the U.S. Embassy actually physically accompanied him to the police station. That's how blatant the interference is. So the elections, Western-style democracy in general, is a system of control. It is what the U.S. and Europe use to control these other nations, because it is a process they can manipulate and influence, and in very indirect ways that doesn't look like political meddling. They do it through the National Endowment for Democracy. They do it through even sometimes these corporate-funded foundations. You have open society, and that's what they're working on. So the elections are coming up May. So very, very, very soon, just a week or so. And most likely the opposition, the US-backed opposition, nobody knows if they're going to make a coalition government or not, but they're probably going to do very well in the polls, because despite the US claiming the current Thai government is an evil dictatorship, they have not even done the basic things they're allowed to do under international law to clean up foreign interference. And it's because they fear US reprisal for doing so. So very hard to tell what's going to happen. In the past, opposition governments have gotten into power, and then there are protests, and it kicks off a whole cycle of instability. It has held Thailand back for years and years. We see the growing relationship with China. It's a light at the end of the tunnel that eventually Thailand can shake off this Western influence and reach its full potential with genuine partners like China and like other nations in the region. But I think there's still going to be at least one more cycle of political instability and possibly even violence.
And I don't know Thailand's voting laws. Are you allowed to vote as a foreign citizen?
Oh, no. Yeah. And it's extremely difficult for any foreigner to get Thai citizenship.
Yeah.
But those are the laws of the land. I respect that. I think it's one of Thailand's strengths, actually. In general, the care that they take with their sovereignty and the way they try to protect it. But again, the United States, the nuclear armed superpower. And if you tell the US no, there are real world consequences. And Thailand has to play this balancing act. Yeah.
Yeah, there absolutely are real world consequences. I think this is one of the things that I've never really quite been able to understand, is how people are so blind to the open outward aggression that the US often uses as their, diplomacy. The Russians, use military as an arm of diplomacy. And the US seems to use chaos as their diplomacy. And I mean, you're seeing it in Sudan, you're seeing it all over the country, or all over the world. You're seeing it in Syria and Ukraine, and it's just I've never really been able to quite wrap my brain around just ignoring that fact. And then the projection on countries like Russia and China saying that they're the aggressors and they're, coming after us when you're on their border or in their country. I've just never understood that.
Yeah, exactly. If you look at a global map and you map out where the U.S. is involved militarily or through the National Endowment for Democracy, heavily interfering, even stirring up physical violence in the streets, you will see how it completely encircles both Russia and China. And so what we saw in Ukraine in, say, 2014 is a very similar process that we've seen here in Thailand in 2009, 2010. Interestingly enough, in 2014, there was a counter-color revolution, which was very successful. But unfortunately, from that period to today, I don't think enough has been done to uproot the US networks. I mean, the US basically builds up a parallel system to eventually overwrite the indigenous institutions of a targeted nation. It's very insidious. It's done over a very long period of time. And I mean, that's my main focus. I mean, a lot of people know me from my commentary and analysis of Ukraine, but before that, I have primarily focused on U.S. interference through the color revolution model.
Yeah. Would if the instability breaks out, are you? This is a personal question. Are you going to stay in Thailand? Is that home for you now?
I have weathered it before. Before I was anonymous. I'm not anonymous right now. Again, it's I mean, it is my home. My family is here. So what choice do I have? And it's something that people have to stand up, because if we don't stand up to it, especially because it's my government, the United States, that is doing this, that is ultimately behind us. It's a responsibility for all of us to stand up and fight back against it. It's incredible injustice, and if we all run away from it every time it crops up, we'll run out of places to run eventually.
Yeah, that I get called, Russian propagandist. I get called, I mean, everything you've been called, I'm sure. You know them all. Uh, and I see it as I see it so funny because the way I look at it is I want a stronger, healthier America that isn't doing these things around the world. An America that's focusing on itself and, more beneficial to both Americans and the rest of the free world. So I, it's always been an issue for me that I, as an American, am not allowed to talk about the things that America is doing wrong in the world without being accused of being something else. And I've never understood it, and it's always been a problem to me. And I very much respect what you do, and I hope you keep doing it because it's beneficial
Yeah,
for everybody.
and yeah, and likewise. And the reason they try to make you feel that way is because if Americans aren't speaking up about what America is doing, then ultimately who is, and who has the power to change it? Who knows America better than Americans? So I mean, it really is incumbent upon us to do this and let them call us names. And I can see clearly that it's making a difference. And the thing is, not any one of us is going to change everything overnight, but all of us together working a little bit each day, it all adds up at the end of the year. After 5 or 10 years, it really does all add up. And it's part of investing in multipolarism. And it brings us all the way back to the topic of Ukraine and Russia and China. I mean, ultimately, that's what they're doing. And that's what everyone needs to do if they want to see this change.
Yeah. I think that one thing that people need to understand is the US losing hegemony in the world is not a bad thing. The reason why the US became as great and as powerful as they were is because they had a rival polar power that was forcing them to innovate and, you know, expand and grow and beat somebody. They had competition. It wasn't this narcissistic, lazy attitude where we're in charge, and if you don't follow us, you're wrong, and everything starts slowing down and getting bureaucratic and so on. So I think that people need to understand that the US entering into a multipolar world is going to be healthy for the US. Maybe not initially, but in the long run, the US will benefit from these changes.
Maybe even immediately. I mean, the United States is being displaced out of the Middle East, and what is filling the void except peace and constructive relations between countries we were told were implacable enemies? Well, they were not implacable enemies. That was all part of the propaganda the US used to explain to the public why these nations were fighting. But the real reason they were fighting is because the US, like all empires before it, pitted them against each other. It's the classic divide and conquer. They did this to the entire Middle East. And as their, I would say, toxic influence fades away, we're going to see nations allowed to reach their full potential, not just internally, but between themselves and their neighbors as well.
Yeah, I mean, who would have guessed out of the Ukraine conflict and, a civil war in Syria, we would have a rapprochement between Iran and Saudi Arabia. It's just like, I feel like we're in an alternate timeline now. We've parted ways with reality, and now it's just nonsense and randomness, and it's fun to watch. We're living through historic times. I think that we pretty much covered everything that we needed to cover today. I think this is a solid place to wrap it up. Brian, you think?
Sure, yeah. It was a great conversation. I hope we can do them a little more often now.
Yeah, no, I would like, I'm getting back to weekly now. I've done 3 podcasts this week, so I'm definitely back. This will be a regular thing, and we'll make it happen.
All right, sounds good.
All right. Thank you, everybody, for listening. This has been episode number 28 of Calibrated with Scott. See you next time.